Welcome to everyone. Welcome to our presentation of the research we did with women financial advisors, which we'll speak to as you'll see why they make or do make or would make the ideal advisor in the financial advisory industry. So just to give an overview of why we did this, Zeldis periodically, most of the work we do is for our clients and it's proprietary to them. But a couple times a year, we do our own proprietary research on a topic that we think would be of value to our clients. And in this case, we've been seeing in the work we do in the financial and investment industry, we've been seeing a trend around women investors where, some statistics that sort of speak to it. 63% of women under the age of 45 are the financial decision makers in their household, compared to 37% of older women. So we're seeing that women are more likely to be becoming the decision makers in their household when it comes to finances and investment. We also know, and some of you may have seen this elsewhere, that women are going to be in control of more and more of the wealth in the country. Right now, the estimate is that 30 trillion in assets will shift into the hands of US women in the next decade, and it will only get bigger from there. So they're going to be in control of a lot of money. And we also know from research that's been done that 70% of widows switch financial advisors within a year of their partner's death. So, they may not have that relationship. They may not feel that level of trust and loyalty to the advisor they were using when their spouse was alive. And so they look to make a change. So again, this kind of speaks to women investors really being more and more in control of wealth and decisions when it comes to investing. And yet we see a lag when it comes to women advisors, women in the financial industry, with only 15 to, or somewhere between 15 and 20% of financial advisors being women. And that varies depending on source. And in fact, the Department of Labor has it higher, closer to 30, but really that hasn't been replicated anywhere else. And most of the numbers I've seen are in that 15 to 20% range. And it hasn't really moved. It hasn't really shifted significantly over the last, let's say 10 or 15 years. It's really been increasing quite slowly. Now, there could be some question as to what's the connection, right? What does it matter if there's all these, women investors are becoming more prominent, more important in the industry? How is that connected to needing more, the number of women advisors? There is not, a clear-cut study that has shown that women investors prefer women advisors, but there have been a couple of recent studies that indicate it is moving in that direction, especially with younger women. So a couple studies by Charles Schwab, a study by State Street Global Advisors, both showed that younger women are proportionally more likely to prefer women advisors. So as women investors become more prominent, more important, make up a bigger proportion of the client segment, it's going to be important to have women advisors to work with them. But in addition, and we'll see this as we look at the research we did, in general, there's been a shift in what they look for from an advisor, and they're looking for more, holistic planning, more of a relationship-based model. And as we'll see, women advisors may be better suited in general to what investors are looking for from their advisors these days. So let's talk about what we did. This is qualitative research. We did 16 one-hour one-on-one Zoom discussions with women financial advisors. You'll see we tried to get a pretty good mix of the industry in terms of a number of different factors. Years of experience. We had very new advisors to advisors who've been in the business for 30 plus years. We had a pretty even mix of channel. As you can see, independent broker-dealers, regional broker-dealers, wirehouse, bank, RIA, insurance, mix of assets under management, team versus solo practice, geography throughout the US. And we did include 3 women of color and 2 LGBTQ women in our research. Obviously, those are small numbers within qualitative to make any big conclusions, but we wanted to try to get a representative mix of women advisors. So I want to start out by talking a little bit about how women view a career in financial advisory. What brought them into it? What do they think about it? What do they see as the benefits? So I'm going to start kind of each section with a quote that sort of exemplifies what we're talking about here. For me, it's just loving what I do and finding value in what I do. The money, it's nice, but I can't get excited about that. I love the work. I love the people I work with. I love my clients. I care about them. When they experience excitement and joy in their life, I can tag along vicariously. How many people get to say that? So you'll see this pattern where women are really, they love these women advisors. Really, it's a calling for them. They're very passionate about what they do. They're very excited to go to work in the morning. They are, not looking to retire at any point. They really love their job. So talking, we spoke to 16 women advisors. What was interesting is that for almost all of them, this career was a second career or a late career. 14 of the 16, in fact. We had a mix. We had some that had a career originally that was tangential to financial advisory. So we had some women in banking, insurance, who worked in the back office of an advisory firm, an accountant. So, they touched this business. It wasn't as, big of a leap. They knew folks in the business. So it was a more natural transition, although it was still a transition. It wasn't what they did initially. We also had a set of women who did things, had nothing to do with the financial industry. So we had an attorney, she was just about to take a job from a US attorney, in fact, had been offered that opportunity when her father passed away. And in dealing with his estate and all the challenges that entailed, she decided she wanted to go into this business to help people avoid what she had experienced. We also have, teachers, someone in retail and manufacturing, just all over the place. And may have been exposed by someone they knew, a family member, kind of almost randomly to this business. We only had 2 women who actually started their career as a financial advisor. One who had a father who owned a firm and she went to work for him. She works for him now, which we thought we might see more of, but she was the only one of our 16. And another actually was exposed to this opportunity in college, learned about being a financial advisor while in college and pursued that from there. So what do these women see as the benefits to a career as a financial advisor? And overlaying all of this, they do think it's a great career, and they are really positive about it. You don't hear folks, oh, don't do it, avoid it, do something else. No, they really think they're very encouraging. They think it's a really positive experience, positive career. So number one across the board, everybody mentioned, they love helping people. They, again, love what they do. And that translates to them as helping their clients meet their goals, be successful, live full lives. They really love doing that every day. And that's a driving factor for them. They believe that a career as a financial advisor is very flexible, that they have a lot of freedom and autonomy. They can make their own hours. You can see the quote here, I never missed one of my daughter's track meets or my son's football games. They feel it's very compatible with being a parent and having a balance between work and home life. Not that they don't work hard. Absolutely, they talk about to a person that they do, but that they have some flexibility in how they do that. Income and stability, they really feel like once they get their start, it's a stable income that can help support their family. And in that sense, it's a career that can make them, financially successful. And just really enjoy, again, going back to that enjoyment, loving their job, they enjoy the relationships. They consider their clients their friends. They like the people they work with. You'll see later, they really look for a fit with their client. And they don't work with clients they don't like. So they're working with people they like, and that makes them enjoy it day to day. And these things, we ask them how they define success in their career. And you'll see this really overlaps very directly with the previous slide, right? What are the benefits? So steady income, being able to support their family, is really important to them. Changing clients' lives and helping their clients meet their goals. Loving what they do, right? Enjoying their job, having that work-life balance, and being their own boss and in control. This is how they define their successful career. You'll see later when we ask them to kind of compare and contrast themselves with their male counterparts, that there are some differences here, that they think men are motivated a little bit different, define success differently than women do. You can see again, in their own words, I don't see a better profession for women as far as if you're really wanting to grow a career and create a substantial income while feeling really good about what you do, and then also having a balanced life, a family, and kids. It's a great career. So in a nutshell, there's kind of like all those things in one, and why they see this as a really positive career. And now I want to talk about, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. While they absolutely value their career and see the benefits, they've also encountered some challenges and barriers along the way. Some of these challenges and barriers might be shared by men in the industry. Others, they would say are, more salient and relevant for women. So again, kind of starting off with a quote, I still think there's a bias towards males, by clients, by prospects, particularly. I'm going to say older men, just because of the generational attitudes of older men. There really was a prejudice toward women. It was very hard for women to break in. It didn't matter how smart or how aggressive or how good you were. So we'll see that, one of the barriers we're going to talk about, 3 or 4 of them, one of them is definitely sexism that has existed and continues to exist. But to start out, the first thing I want to talk about as a barrier are sort of misperceptions of what it is to be a financial advisor and what that entails. And we'll see here like some overlap later when we talk about what's keeping more women from the industry. Some of these things really come into play. So the first is that a lot of these women thought this is a math job, this is an analytics and a numbers job, and that's not for me. Similarly, a kind of on the other side, the other misperception is that it's a sales job, that I'm going to have to be a pushy salesperson, to be successful in this business. There's this idea that they're going to struggle because people aren't going to want a woman financial advisor, that's something that they're concerned about. Feeling like they just don't want to be in an industry that's an old boys club and where they're going to be, outnumbered all the time by men. Some feel like they lack confidence. One woman we spoke to, and we'll see a quote here in a second, just felt like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not capable. I'm not able to do that. Some worry about how their style will be a fit for this career. They don't like to pressure people. They might feel like they're going to get taken advantage of because they're not good at setting boundaries or saying no. So you can see here, it wasn't an area that I thought I would ever be capable of doing, actually. I just thought that I couldn't do it. I always had an interest in it, but I thought you had to be an old man to do it. So there's just these, kind of before they started this job. And some of them had to see a model, right? They had to, one woman, the woman who's that first quote there, she really thought she couldn't do this. She was the accountant that we talked to, and someone else in her office did it. Another woman in her office became a financial advisor, and that was enough for her to give it a try and see that she could do it. So another big challenge that these women encountered, and again, I think this would apply to some extent for men as well, is just what the training and onboarding process is for a new advisor. It can, depending on the firm and depending on how they enter the industry, it can be really difficult. And this slide just sort of illustrates the ways where it can work well. And some of the women we talked to have this experience, and the ways where it can be really challenging and difficult to overcome. So on the left-hand side, you can see it works really well if they have mentors, someone who's, and it doesn't have to be a woman. A lot of the women we talked to had a mentor who was a man, who was wonderful and really helped them in their career, but just having someone to help guide the way. Compensation is really important. So, obviously a lot of financial advisors, it is a sales job, and many of them are fee-based. They make a fee on what their clients invest with them, or they make a commission on products they sell. So to start out, they don't have a book of business. And some programs, some firms offer a pretty good program where there'll be a salary. One woman we had a salary for 3 years, which decreased over those 3 years as her sales went up, but it gave her something to help start out. Something else that many of our 16 women, I want to say 13 of the 16, had a CFP. They were certified financial planners, and they went through the training and certification that entailed and talked about how that really helped them be successful. It helped them with their clients and their knowledge of the industry a great deal. The ability to have flexible sales strategies, not all cold calling, but other ways of networking and building their book, and being at firms that were open to that, and help with book building, right? Some firms have programs where retiring advisors start to share their business with new advisors, or leads are sent to new advisors, and all of those things. The women who experienced those things felt that made it much easier to be successful in their career at the start. Everything on the right side is sort of the flip of that, right? So believe it or not, there's one prominent financial firm that still, with their new advisors, still encourages literally physically knocking on doors, going to people's houses and businesses and knocking. And we had 2 women who worked for that firm to start out, and one who had a particularly terrifying experience doing that, and would not do that anymore. Obviously, that could be challenging for anyone, but I think women in particularly could feel less safe in that situation. But just also, firms, a lot of firms, cold calling is the standard new business approach. Some firms only give you a salary or some compensation for months as opposed to years. Some firms have this sort of expectation that there'll be X percent who don't make it, and they're okay with that. And it's sort of on your own, sink or swim, dog eat dog. So all those things on the right, women really struggled through that. One woman who, again, only had a salary for months, she didn't have a husband who had a solid job at the time. She said she was one of 5 new advisors that, made it. Everyone else didn't, because she also started during the financial crisis. So she was sort of really, facing a lot of challenges, but not having that compensation was a big one. So kind of the elephant in the room with all these women, when we're talking about barriers and challenges, is the idea of sexism. And, are they experiencing it? How prevalent is it in the financial advisory industry? So I'm going to start out by kind of saying that generally, most of the women we spoke to said that experiencing very clear-cut, overt sexism day to day is rare. It's not something that they generally experience on a day-to-day basis. Most say that the vast majority of their clients and their colleagues support them and do not appear to have any bias against women advisors. So that's their day-to-day. But nearly every woman we spoke to did experience at least some instances of overt sexism. So while it isn't on a regular basis, it's there. And in some cases it's there, this year, last year. It's not like this was all 20 years ago. Women who were pulled aside in the stairwell and told that you don't belong here. Women can't succeed in this business, just outright from a colleague, from another advisor. The woman who works with her father saying, there are many clients that her father tells her, don't bother, they will not speak to you because you're a woman. So it's definitely an issue. More often and kind of more salient to the women I spoke to was this idea of institutional sexism. So just sort of that the industry itself still has a lot of features, a culture that cannot be as welcoming to women. And some of the big elements of that are just a lack of representation of women. They're just not there. They're not represented. They're not visible. They're not in leadership roles or on committees or, speaking at conferences. And just this idea that women need to work a little harder, they're a little less credible, that they're not going to get the returns that men are going to get. So sort of kind of overlaying perceptions that might be out there. And you just have kind of a quote here, the man who's retiring, he'll call me sweetie or something like that, and then come back and apologize. I couldn't really care less, but certainly think that if you're calling me a little name like that, you don't look at me as your equal. So just kind of an example of sort of a day-to-day something somebody experienced. And I want to mention too that we hear from the women of color in the research, as well as kind of some of the older and younger women, that this can be compounded with racism and ageism as well. Like the woman who works for her father, she thinks some of it's because she's a woman and some of it's because she's young. And both of those things come into play. So I'm just going to quickly, and these are the only videos in the presentation, but I do want to share directly 2 examples of stories that we heard, just to sort of bring this to life a little bit in the voice of the advisor.
Because they just treated women horribly back then.
Tell me a little bit about that. I want to hear about that. What kinds of discrimination?
I think my biggest memory was Jenny, who was in my office, who was a licensed CA, which in our terms as a client associate, and she worked on the biggest team in the office, and she actually was their CA / business development manager for the team. Very bright woman. And I just remember that my manager at our office, he decided that he did not want to be a manager anymore. He just wanted to focus on production. So Jenny said, "Oh, I'd like to be the manager of the office." Right? She was licensed, she's a CA, she was a perfect candidate. She'd been doing trades for years. She was probably 10 years older than I was, maybe 15. And she applied for the position, and a handwritten note came back from the president of the company at the time to the FA, who was the manager at the time. Her boss, her team manager was our office manager. Over my dead body, would a woman ever be manager at Legg Mason? And that was just a pure indication. That was probably 2000 and I don't know, 1 or 2. But it was a pure indication of, just the way that women were treated and blatantly discriminated against. I mean, he had no problem putting that in writing.
This was probably 4 years ago. I went to a symposium with J.W. Cole, and this guy in there, marketing your practice, says, so you take the women and you invite them to a jewelry party, and while the women are all at a jewelry party, you have the men in an educational event teaching them about different things. And I'm literally sitting there next to an employee of J.W. Cole, and she and I looked at one another, and we literally both walked out of there, and we went and got somebody who had a little more authority than she did, and they shut this guy down. Wow. But that is what you still hear. I mean, this was 4 years ago. You still hear this all over the place, that women are not capable even as a client, much less being capable as an advisor.
I think two really important stories and the voices of the advisor of some of the things that they've experienced in the industry. So I want to just spend a few minutes on this section talking about the business approach. Largely, when we talk to women about their approach with their clients and investing, and it was very similar to what we've heard in a lot of the research we've done with men. Didn't see a lot of differences, but there are a couple, and I do want to talk about them. So starting with this quote, we spend a lot of time together during this prospect phase because I really want them to understand what I do, and I want to understand where they are. We're going to have probably 3, 4, 5 conversations, and we're going to put together a full financial plan. I don't charge for any of this. This is going to be good for both of us because if it's a good fit, we're going to be together for the next 20 years. So in terms of how they approach their business and working with clients and prospecting, this idea of sort of spending a lot of time with the client and really making sure it's a good fit is very high on their list. Also, planning. They're all about planning. All of these women to a person, they don't consider themselves sort of investment managers. They're planners, and that's what they're doing, is building a plan with the client. Part of that is making sure first that it's a good fit, spending a lot of time listening to the client and what their goals are and what they're looking for. Being more goal focused versus performance focused, spending time to educate the clients as opposed to just saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, but really explaining why and having those conversations. And being prepared or knowledgeable, and of course you'd expect that from all advisors, but these women speak to where they see some of their male colleagues who can kind of wing it, as they say, and they feel like they could never wing it, that they need to go in and be uber prepared and really know their stuff because of that potential perception that they might be less credible. And, throughout this, right, if we talk about women and how women and men are differentiated in the industry, obviously that's largely based on the women we spoke to and their perceptions of how they are the same or different from the men that they work with. It also, to some extent, and I'll mention this when it comes up, I do, and my colleagues do, hundreds of interviews or focus groups with financial advisors in a given year. We talk to many, many, many of them, and based on the proportions that we talked about in the beginning, most of them are men, right? So some of it is based on what we've heard over our careers as researchers as well. So I will say, it's funny that I was putting this together and I was doing some interviews with financial advisors on another project and was talking to a man who was venting to me that he had 2 prospects that he had been talking to about becoming their advisor, and got really frustrated when they wanted to have a second conversation before, signing the paperwork and making him their advisor. He just felt like that was a waste of his time, and he pulled himself out of the running because he didn't want to have that second conversation. Just thought that was such an interesting contrast from what I was hearing here, which is these women will talk to these people for hours before they actually, make the relationship official. I also mentioned, and this is definitely not unique to women, I've been hearing this from all advisors I've been speaking to more recently, and that is that COVID has really shifted their interactions with their clients to virtual, and that for most, they really see that as a benefit. There are some that miss the in-person, but many of them say they will never go back. And especially for the women we spoke to here, it's made the work-life balance that much easier. So in terms of their clients, another difference here, and we weren't sure if this would be the case or not, is that most of the women we spoke to do report having a higher proportion of women clients than the men that they work with, than do the men that they work with. So they tend to have more than half of their clients are either single women or couples where the woman is the primary decision maker. So they tend to work, a lot with single women and with successful women. What's interesting is that some of the women we spoke to was absolutely by design. That's who they target. That's who they market to. They join women's groups. They do, educational things geared towards women. But other of the advisors we talked to, as I'm asking this question, they're like figuring it out. They're like, oh, yeah, I do have more women clients. I do have more than my male counterparts or my male colleagues. So it doesn't, it's not always by design, but often it is. Several also mentioned really working with a lot of clients who come to them in transition. So during a divorce, widowhood, a job change, that tends to be how some of their clients come to them, and they feel that they have a lot of strength in dealing with that or helping clients through that. And interestingly, some of our women FAs that we talked to, not just the women of color that we spoke to, but even the white women we spoke to, mentioned having more clients of color than their male counterparts or their male colleagues. They don't really know why, but they tend to have a more diverse clientele than their male counterparts. Otherwise, their client base is similar to men in terms of who they target by age, mostly pre-retirees and retirees, a lot of professionals and small business owners. That's very similar to what we hear when we talk to men advisors. One thing that we talked about and we thought would be of value to some of our clients who have wholesalers that deal with financial advisors is we asked them about the wholesaler relationship and what they're looking for there. And some of this overlaps with, because I've done whole studies around this wholesaler relationship. And when we talk to men, some of these things overlap. So on the right there, this idea of honesty and having a wholesaler that's not going to tell you that product is perfect for everyone, but it will tell you what it does do and what it doesn't do. Both men and women value that. Relevance and knowing my business, the same. The other pieces we heard more from women. So being an educational resource, some women talked about that was their training when they started out, was asking all the wholesalers and using the wholesalers as an educational resource. So both when starting out, but then also on an ongoing basis, looking to wholesalers for ideas for, the best fit for their client and for, really recommendations and help, and what are other advisors doing differently, and what are some best practices. And the biggest difference we saw is that women are not looking for a personal relationship. They really want it to be more business. They don't want to be taken out to dinner. They don't want to go golfing. They're really looking for a professional, right? So that they're not looking for a social relationship or a friend. They want someone to bring them value, education, and ideas. Another thing that came up is that women really want to see more women wholesalers. If anything, there are fewer proportionally women wholesalers than there are women advisors. And I had a couple that said, "Oh, I had one and she was great, and I really loved working with her, and she was my favorite. She was gone." And many of them have not seen a woman wholesaler. So something to think about if you are part of a company that employs wholesalers, is maybe bringing women into the wholesaling staff. I have some comments here, some quotes that I thought were really interesting around wholesaler. I'm not going to spend time here because you'll all get the deck and the presentation after, so you can kind of dig in there. So I want to jump into kind of the meat here, 2 more sections. This one really why we feel and why women feel that they are the ideal advisor, that they are more suited as the ideal advisor. So another quote here, there's the art and science of what I do. The science is the technical side, the money management. Then there's the connecting their money to their value, the purpose, getting to know them on a deeper level so that you're helping them live their best lives possible. And there's an art to that isn't easily learned. It can be, it's not impossible to learn, but I think women just innately have that trait. They have a jump start. So this is a word cloud of when we asked women, what unique qualities do you bring to the table as a woman financial advisor? This is sort of a compilation of what we heard, and I'll distill it a little bit on the next slide, but I just wanted to kind of put it out there because it was incredibly consistent, what they said. And you can see on this quote on the left here, I think it's the empathy aspect, the listening aspect, simplifying and breaking down details of financial planning in layman's terms. Women have the ability to explain and understand in a way that I feel like resonates possibly better, at least I feel that way, than a male counterpart. So we distilled it into kind of 4 areas where women think that they may, have natural strengths that could be different from men advisors, at least again from a natural. And I should say, just like, I'm caveating it, they were like, hesitant to talk in broad strokes, right? Not every man, but broadly, this is what they saw in their experiences. And again, a lot of this is very consistent with what we've seen in our research. So for them, it's all about relationships and connection. This idea that they're creating not just a business relationship, but something deeper, and that leads to a longer term relationship. Really important, empathy and active listening. So making a client feel heard and valued, and that builds trust. There was a quote from one of the women. She's talking to her, she was relaying a story where she was talking to a colleague about a conversation she had with a client. And her male colleague said, "Well, why didn't you just cut them off and tell them what you were doing?" And she said, "Well, I would never do that." And he said, "Oh, you just need to cut them off." Clearly it wasn't a priority for, him to listen as it was for him to tell the client what they needed to do. Education. So again, important for women, for their clients to understand, focus on educating clients, making sure they understand the investments and the choices that are being made. And again, that leads to a more satisfied client, a more loyal client who understands the connection between the choices being made and their goals. And finally, inclusion, and this probably seems pretty basic, but this idea that if one of our women advisors is working with a couple, she makes sure that both parties are heard and that she's talking to both, the woman and the man. She's including the women and the women in the conversation, conveying their value. Again, building the relationship with both partners when they're spouse. So, that sounds pretty straightforward and that everybody should be doing that. But from what we heard from the women in our research, that isn't always the case. And they don't feel that that's always the case. And all of those things, you know, in their minds and in what they're saying is what builds trust. It builds better planning, because if you're listening and you're listening for the goals and what they want, you're educating them, that's better planning, and it makes them better advisors. And it's interesting because this whole conversation also led to a conversation about how the industry has shifted towards this approach, right? So where, you know, in the last 10 or 15 years, away from sort of investment manager, broker, stockbroker, you know, and more towards planning, more towards kind of a holistic view. And so all of those things of what, you know, and there's been research done recently that is what a lot of investors are looking for. Not all, but a lot of investors are looking for that approach. And so the women we spoke to felt like their natural strengths, sort of what they already do naturally, really is a great match for where the industry has gone. And what, interestingly, some of them mentioned that some of the men in their offices seem to be evolving in that direction, and even sometimes asking their advice to be, you know, to evolve their style to be closer to what women have been doing all along. So, you know, outright when we ask women, how do you think you're different from the men in your office, the men you work with? And again, they all, you know, with a grain of salt, you know, not all men, this is, you know, broad strokes. From in terms of focus, the women feel like they're more focused on relationships, on kind of being goals focused, holistic planning, where some of the men they work with are more focused on performance returns, like what percent did I get back at the end of the year, right? What percent? Investments, like what specific investments, data, running analysis, that's a difference in focus. And I should say, like, some of the women, you know, have said when we talked about making sure it's a fit, you know, in that approach, that if they had a prospect that was really focused on the number, like what percent am I going to get back? What percent do you get your clients back every year? That they felt like that might not be a good fit. In terms of what motivates them, women, kind of what we talked about at the beginning, motivated by helping people, loving what they do, having a stable income. They want to make money. There's no question there. And flexibility and autonomy. The men that they work with, they feel are motivated more by making as much money as possible. So not just having a stable, solid income, but really more. I several quotes from the women we talked to about the men want more, more, more. Like, what's the next level? Production, right? AUM, how much assets can they get in? Awards, you know, hitting the top for the month, the top for the year. That those are things that drive some of the men that they work with. And then approach, and we talked about this a little bit, right? Women, it's about listening and conversations, personal connection, education. From, again, their perspective, they see that men sometimes, they're very confident, they're very assured. Some women describe that as kind of pompous, right? Like, I know best. Talking versus listening, right? Telling the client what they need to do. And sometimes using more of a fear-based approach with clients to motivate them to do certain things. Most of the male advisors I know, and this is not meant to be a negative, it's just a fact, they're motivated by money. My success, my financial success is a byproduct, it's not the goal. So the last thing I want to talk about before I let y'all go is this idea of how can we get more women into the industry. We've talked about why it might be important, right? The business case for it. If there are more women investors, there's more women controlling money. You know, someone in the chat mentioned also that there's some evidence that shows that women run better companies, they make more money, and that's true. And there's been research to show that women investors do better too. So we have all these women. In general, women may want, especially younger women, may want women advisors, but in general, people may just, male or female clients may want the types of advisors that women are likely to be. So how can we get more women in the industry? How can we build that up? And this quote really encapsulates almost all of the things we're going to talk about, but I think it starts at college. I think it starts at high school and college and really getting in. I think we're just not getting the applicants because a lot of women think this is a math job or a sales job. Women are scared off sometimes by both of those types of roles, when really this is a relationship job. If you can build relationships and manage relationships, you will be successful. That's really what this is about. So what are the key barriers and how can they be overcome? First, this not knowing, right? Like, I mean, that's a really basic thing, is literally these women that we talked to, other than one of them, didn't even really know being a financial advisor was a possible career. They were not exposed to it. They didn't have the awareness until later. So the idea of financial literacy and career education in high school and college. So introducing the idea of this career at a younger age with women. Some of the women we spoke to do that. They go into high school, they go to college fairs, and they talk about being a financial advisor. So they're looking for more of that. This idea, this misconception that being an advisor is either a sales job or a math job, right? Really, there needs to be some communication. There needs to be some messaging around what this job really is, right? Relationships, empathy, listening, helping people, and meeting their goals. That's the core of what an advisor does. And I had an advisor that I spoke to, she said, I'm not great with the like I outsource the money management. I use a money manager to do that. You don't have to, and most of the women we spoke to didn't and did it themselves, or they had a firm that helped with it. But so it's not that there's no numbers, there's no math, but that's not the core of the job from these women's perspective. It's an old boys club, and I'll be outnumbered and not taken seriously. So this is where it comes in, the importance of having visibility and representation of women in leadership, on committees, on magazine covers, in speaking roles. Women really need to be in this industry, and they need to be visible. A lot of these women talked about firms paying lip service to that, but not actually doing it, right? Sending out an email about how women are so important and we're going to focus on women. And then the next time I went to the conference, it was 8 white men around the table having a conversation. So this is a big deal. A lot of these women talk about what a big deal this is. And they try to be visible to the other women in their organization. I won't be able to learn, sell, and earn enough to support myself. So we come back to what we talked about in the beginning about the onboarding and training, and really ideally having programs that offer a salary for a longer period of time, even if it decreases over time, and really promoting the benefits of the career, that it can have flexibility, there can be a stable income, that it's a good career to have. And I'll be on my own. And a lot of the women we spoke to talked about the importance of having a mentor. Not everyone we spoke to worked on teams. Some were solo and were great with that, but the ones that did work on teams really talked about how that support system helped them. That having a team approach, if they did have a weakness, if they did have something they weren't strong, they had other people they could rely on, and how comforting that was and how helpful that was for them in their career. So what can financial firms do? And of course, it depends on, some financial firms actually employ advisors, or some are selling to advisors, it really depends. But I do think that women are looking for financial firms that play any role in the industry to take a role in this, to take part in this. So recruiting women, helping recruit and educate women, financial literacy, going into schools, having internships, having women in leadership and on committees and places where they are visible, and not just paying lip service to it. Women's committees, networking events, programs. So things that help focus on the women advisors in a firm, in a place, whether that's, again, the firm itself, like a wirehouse, or a firm that sells to women. Allianz came up a couple times as a company that does a women's conference, that has good material for women investors, that really is focused on this, and that's seen in a very positive light. Onboarding and training, the things we already talked about there. Help with leads and building books for new advisors coming into the business. Mentoring programs, teams, providing resources for mothers. One of our participants talked about the evolution of having children and having to deal with breastfeeding as an advisor, and how when she started out in her first job as an advisor, There was no place she could pump. There was nothing she could do. There was just nowhere. She didn't have a door. She couldn't close the door. There wasn't a room. Then the next firm she worked at as an advisor when she had her second child, there was a room, but it was the server room because it was the only room with a lock on the door, and it was 65 degrees or lower at all times because of the computers. So it was not exactly a pleasant place to have to go. To where she is now, I think she's at Merrill Lynch now, and that there's a beautiful room that they can with rocking chairs. And it's a lovely place. She's not having any kids now, but she kind of recognized the evolution of that. And providing materials and education for women investors, because remember, a lot of these women advisors have a high proportion of women clients, and they want materials that target those clients without talking down to them, without treating them either like they're all the same in one big group, or that there's some sort of weird subgroup niche when they make up 50% of the population. So they don't want materials that look just like the other materials but are pink. They want things that are actually going to be of value and deal with issues that are relevant to women. So just to kind of summarize some of the implications that we talked about, and of course it depends on what kind of firm you work for, how relevant these different ones are. But the first thing I want to stress is that this matters, that as we talked about in the beginning, the women investors are growing in prominence and in control and need to be a focus. And I think a lot of financial firms have recognized that. But I do think there is a connection between that and bringing more women advisors into the industry. I also think just it's beneficial in terms of what all clients, men and women, are looking for in an advisor. So I think increasing the number of advisors is really important to making sure you're meeting the needs of clients. And I don't know that folks really recognize how important this is. We didn't see as much interest in this topic as we expected to, or as that we've seen in other topics that we've done, which I'll be honest was kind of disappointing to me. But I do think it matters, and I think a business case can be made for it. Wholesalers. So if you have wholesalers, I think it's important that they know that women advisors may be less prone to be looking for the social aspects of that relationship, being wined and dined. They want someone who's honest, who brings them ideas, who helps educate them. And they would also really welcome and gravitate towards women wholesalers. And finally, all the things we just talked about, right? Any financial firm can take a role in going out and recruiting women, educating women about a career in financial advisory, making sure women are visible and have a seat at the table, broader messaging efforts as to what a career as a financial advisor is and isn't, literacy programs in schools, infrastructure and resources that meet the needs of women. So there's a lot that can be done. So that's it in terms of the deck. More than happy to talk about any of this in more detail with any of you. I think it was one of the most interesting research studies I've done, and I really enjoyed doing these interviews. I think these are important voices that need to be heard. And I'm, again, happy to discuss it further. Also happy to do this webinar, go through this again if you have other folks in your company that would like to hear it or value from hearing it. I'm happy to do a custom one where we can chat back and forth. You see my email there. Happy to do that. Just feel free to reach out. We will be sending the link to the webinar to everybody who attended or registered, so you can keep an eye out for that as well. Thanks to everybody who attended.